because they've now reactivated HAARP. And when you hear about what they're going to be doing, I think you're going to be pretty intrigued. Now, we can skip all the BS at the top of the article where they tell us about how many antennas there are. If you're not into HAARP, you probably aren't going to even care, but 180 antennas, 22 meters in the air, la 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 la, HAARP, HAARP, HAARP. Then we get down to the bottom and it tells us what they're actually going to be doing. And in the experiments, they're going to be bouncing radio waves off the ionosphere to create plasma bubbles up in the ionosphere and upper atmosphere. These plasma bubbles are going to reflect waves down into the ocean, where it's then going to reflect off the ocean and be picked up and studied. Now they're doing it for detection of ships in the ice, okay? And this is very, very interesting that after 3 years of supposed silence and BS stories where they said they were going to be tearing down HAARP, they're now admitting that they're going to be generating new plasma balls in the atmosphere over the next several days as they're targeting the ocean. And this, to me, reeks of something like back in 2011, which back in 2011, HAARP was in full operation, and we had the website to reference so we could see when they were doing activity. And when Japan occurred, that HAARP was in activity, and then they shut off HAARP and put a big black line over the data for that time period, so we couldn't see it. We couldn't see the ionospheric soundings that were happening at the time. But I find it extremely, highly, ironically crazy that they would be firing back up HAARP to be targeting the ionosphere and the oceans at the same time where we're looking for a megaquake to possibly occur because of deep earthquake activity. Now, everybody, we have to go back to 2013, 2014, when a false story was put out by someone I hate to even call out, but I have to mention it, that there was a channel, we'll call him Big Solar. Big Solar put out a story saying that they were taking down HAARP entirely and that it was being bulldozed. That story was repeated in the news and then picked up by the A.R.R.L, the Amateur Radio League. They then went on and developed that story saying that HAARP was being torn down to say that HAARP was being sold into private contractors' hands by DARPA. That was an incorrect story as well. And I'm going to take you guys over to my website where I have a plethora of information on the topic, just a boatload of information on the topic of HAARP and weather modification. And it took me years to put this information together. And I mean, I find it, you guys will love it, but we found the 2013, 2014, and I haven't uploaded them yet, but we have the 2015, 2016, and now we're having the 2017 budgets for HAARP. And we've got them all here on my website. So they never shut it down, and they never stopped using it. But in case you're wondering what the High Frequency Active Aurora Research Program is, it's nothing more than radio waves, high-frequency radio waves, that are targeted up into the upper atmosphere and beyond, going into the ionosphere. They create superheated balls of plasma, which, like you see on the screen here now, this is an original, that's funny, wrong link. You can see here, it's pretty obvious. Okay, so I've got all the information. It's 4 pages long. It took years to assemble all this information. And what we found basically is the superheated portions of the ionosphere and the upper atmosphere have a weather effect and earthquake effect. Now, we also found that radar stations produce the same effect over a smaller area. And we'll see radar stations, NEXRAD weather radar, pulse. But when it pulses, normally NEXRAD operates in microwave bands. It's a giant microwave, a NEXRAD radar that they use to observe the weather. But when they pulse it, it's like smashing a cymbal, and it goes psh. I want you to imagine like a drummer hitting a cymbal, okay? When they hit the cymbal, it actually produces a high-frequency resonance in the high-frequency band, not in VHF, but in HF, in the same bandwidth, 0 to 17 megahertz. Well, HAARP operates at 0 to 10 megahertz, and it generates this plasma up above the transmitter when it pulses, when HAARP pulses. Well, guess what happens when you pulse a NEXRAD radar? The same thing over a smaller area, and you get these signatures that show up that are giant energy pulses coming from the radar stations, and professionals tried to say these were birds and bugs. Do you know how big of an area this is? Look at that. That's half the United, like a quarter of the United States, an eighth of the United States. Birds and bugs. No, these are energy pulses that come from NEXRAD radar stations that have a weather modification effect. And I'm going to read to you a company called Aqueous, A-Q-U-I-E-S-S, that operated out of Texas. Still operates out of Texas, but this is as of 2012. This is their own document, and Texas hired these people. Now listen to this. Listen. Over the past 10 years, the company Aqueous has repeatedly demonstrated this technology to government and humanitarian observer groups. The proprietary weather modification system operates by utilizing resonance signals to divert oceanic atmospheric rivers into areas experiencing severe drought. The Aqueous system does not rely on chemical or biologically hazardous material spraying, which could potentially harm the environment. And then they give their results that they got in Texas from using the resonance system and resonance radio frequency. Artificial atmospheric ionization, another term for what they do at HAARP. Now here's the breakdown. Let me describe it simply, so even a child who's listening can understand. When they zap the upper atmosphere, here's a great example. When they zap the upper atmosphere, there's charged particles that are currently in the upper atmosphere and ionosphere, in the clouds as well. Electricity in all of it. It's charged. That's what produces our lightning discharge between ground to cloud. And what they found is that these small electrons, the ions, attract water molecules, electricity. And they've made it rain 50 times in the desert over in Dubai. And they've installed these ion generators that generate ions. The ions float out. You guys ever hear of an ionic breeze? Okay, in your house? Those same kind of charged particles coming out of your ionic breeze can also be generated on giant towers using radio waves and DC electricity. Those ions then float away like dust into the atmosphere, and they attract water molecules, forming into clouds, thus then forming into rain. And then there's rotation that develops, actual spinning rotation above the transmitter that they found out that occurs above these transmission stations, like your NEXRAD radar. And they've already done the experiments. This is not my take on it. Dr. Slobodan Tepic over in Switzerland did the experiments. It was on the Weather Channel, that microwaves could be used to generate tornado rotation. Heating above the transmitter. Is anybody shocked when you heat the cold air above a transmitter? It mixes with the cold air and you get rotation above the transmitter. And a tornado forms. Rotation detected. Now here's the NOAA weather modification form. And you can still download it from corporate services at noaa.gov. So go over and check it out, okay? This is, again, their own weather modification form that must be filled out before companies and government does weather modification. They have to submit their results, and the USGS in on it, but they're just into the cloud seeding aspect of spraying. The USGS seeding clouds to make it snow up in Wyoming at north of Colorado. This is just unbelievable that they did this using silver iodide spray. USGS in 2008, 2009, and they've done it every year since in different locations, enhancing the snowpack up in the mountains so that they can, because the USGS is responsible for water flow, and get the companies that are doing this. We sent a reporter. I sent a reporter. My viewers sent a reporter to attend the weather modification conferences where NOAA meets with the National Weather Service and these organizations like the Weather Modification, West Texas Weather Modification Association, Weather Modification Association. We sent a reporter to attend their conferences, and we listened to their results, and they brag it up, how much rain they make it rain. Well, now they figured out a way to do it with radio waves. Okay, so radio waves are now the wave of the future when it comes to generating water molecules in the atmosphere. You don't have to spray anymore. Spraying is a brute force way of doing it. Now you can passively do it by generating ions in the atmosphere that go up. Here's a diagram that comes from HAARP. It comes from Navy.mil, from a .mil website. And this shows us the excitement that happens, the rotation that occurs from the transmitters, how high up goes in kilometers. Take a look at this, 100 kilometers up into the upper atmosphere. And this comes off the HAARP facility. Okay? So this is HAARP. These are actual diagrams from U.S. military showing the affected radius, again, the area that's affected and what happens when they fire this thing up and the rotation that occurs as a result of. And I'm only on page 2 of my 3-page report. So this is, again, something you guys should check out. I've studied this at length. One other thing that's worthy of note, that we have to talk about this. I'm so sorry, guys, but I have to talk about this. That the conjugate point. Now, this is very scientific and complex. Let me describe it simply. Do you see this diagram here? Do you see how the arrow comes off HAARP and goes up and around? And see where it says geomagnetically conjugate point? In this paper by Nikolai Leitnin, Umran Inan, coming out of Stanford University, they found that HAARP up in Alaska has a conjugate point, an opposite side of the planet, and it's down in New Zealand. Okay? Oh, they don't have it available anymore. Let's go search HAARP buoy. Whoops. New Zealand. Oh, here we are. Stanford. Now look at this. I'm opening up the PDF for you to see. The 1-hop ELF VLF measurements at the HAARP conjugate point. Now look where the HAARP conjugate point is. This is the exact corresponding location. Look where it is, guys. Look where it is. Look at the map right here. Here's New Zealand. It's off the southeast coast of New Zealand. Now the conjugate point is the exact magnetic opposite of where HAARP transmits out to. And what they did was they went and put a buoy out here to pick up the HAARP waves that come down and touch the ocean surface and the ocean floor. Now, the idea here is that HAARP sends up a signal, high frequency, that goes up into the upper ionosphere. Up in the upper ionosphere, the signal then turns into what's called VLF. It converts from high frequency, going up from HAARP. HAARP is the high frequency active auroral research program, those big antennas. And it emits a high frequency, just below microwave. It's in the megahertz bands, okay? So it sends up a high frequency wave that goes up into the upper ionosphere where this plasma forms, that plasma bubble that I'm telling you about. They have it marked here with a red blotch saying heating. It just says heating. Okay, that's a giant plasma bubble. That plasma bubble resonates like a speaker, but it's resonating VLF like a giant subwoofer, only much more powerful, and the waves are much longer than a subwoofer, obviously. So they'll hit the string on HAARP, creating a high frequency going up into the atmosphere that then creates air glow, that then creates low frequency that resonates all the way up and down around, following the magnetic field lines of the Earth, down to New Zealand, where the wave comes back down into the Earth. But they found, according to this experiment, which I've read the whole thing on, I've read the whole HAARP 1-hop buoy experiment, they found out that when the wave comes back down, it's reflected by Mother Earth back to HAARP. And it bounces back and forth between New Zealand and HAARP like pulling a string on a guitar or on a harp. Plucking a string on a harp, and it resonates back and forth until the string stops resonating over time. And it resonates for days, they've found. So, off the coast of New Zealand, just so happens, oh, look at that, we got a little earthquake striking in New Zealand. But off the coast of New Zealand is the HAARP conjugate point. Dude, I find this highly, highly coincidental that New Zealand is forecast for a potential large earthquake this week. And, lo and behold, HAARP is firing back up. Do we need to put 2 and 2 together here? I don't know. I would suppose that if you're into science, you will. If you're not, and this is not a conspiracy theory. Everything I just showed you is proved science from the .mil sites themselves. So, I just had to cover that. That's what's going on. And if that's